Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you. I am waiting. I'm just going to start in 1 minute as we have more folks joining us for this very interesting and lively conversation that's about to happen. So let's just wait for 1 more minute. All right. Well, welcome again to Women's Way 17th Annual Book Prize. We are delighted that you have all decided to be here in honor of women and gender-expansive authors who address issues that directly impact the health, rights, opportunities, dignity, and freedom of women, girls, trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and LGBTQ individuals. While we acknowledge that this language will never be enough to encapsulate all the people we center in our work, we want to affirm the full breadth of gender expansiveness and reject cis sexism. So welcome. I'm Diane Corman-Levy, the Chief Disruptor of Women's Way, which works to achieve gender equity by building collective power to disrupt oppressive systems and strengthen alternative models centered in love, dignity, and liberation. And we accomplish this through our 4 key pillars of research, education, advocacy, and grant making. And tonight, this is our annual book prize. I just want to give a little bit of the history of our book prize. The Women's Way Book Prize has been an integral part of our history, and we are actually going to be celebrating our 50th anniversary in 2026. But established in 2007, the book prize honors the legacy of Ernesta Drinker Ballard, a Women's Way founder, first president of the board of directors, an extraordinary champion for women and girls. Each year, we honor a woman or gender-expansive author or co-author for their work in advancing the dialogue about issues impacting women, girls, and gender-expansive individuals. I want to thank a few individuals who made tonight's event possible. Thanks to the members of the book selection committee who volunteered their time, and a special thanks to Jessica Muslin, Chief Operating Officer at Women's Way, who spearheaded and coordinated both the book selection process and tonight's event. So a little bit about the selection process. How do we determine who's the winner? So the winner of the book prize is determined by a selection committee composed of volunteers. Women's Way does an open call for book nominations from our community, following a set of nomination guidelines. One criterion is that the book must address at least one of the following issues: equity, safety, self-sufficiency, reproductive justice, women's leadership, or women's history. And then once the books are nominated, committee members read the books and then engage in a review process that leads to the winning book and author. Over the past 16 years, we have honored outstanding authors, such as Janet Mock for Redefining Realness, My Path to Womanhood, Identity, Love, and so much more. Ijoma Oluo for her book, So You Want to Talk About Race. And Sadiqa Johnson for House of Eve. Well, tonight, we are thrilled to be honoring another outstanding author, Jessica Valenti, for her book, Abortion, Our Bodies, Their Lies, and the Truths We Use to Win. Love the title, Jessica. So Jessica Valenti is a writer, activist, and one of the country's most influential voices on gender and politics. The award-winning author of 8 books, including the New York Times bestseller Abortion, she has shaped the national conversation on feminism for over 2 decades. Jessica's groundbreaking anthology, Yes Means Yes, Visions of Female Sexual Power in a World Without Rape, helped define the modern definition of consent and paved the way for legislation of the same name. She is also widely credited with sparking feminism's online wave as the founder of the trailblazing blog Feministing. A former columnist for The Guardian and The Nation, Jessica's sharp, uncompromising analysis has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and on media outlets from CNN to The Daily Show. She speaks at colleges and organizations nationwide about feminism, abortion, and sexual violence. After the fall of Roe, Jessica founded Abortion Every Day, an urgent synthesis of anything and everything happening with abortion rights in the United States. Jessica, thank you for doing that. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughter. So about the book, Abortion. In her most urgent book yet, New York Times bestselling author Jessica Valenti shines a light on the conservative assault on women's freedom, cutting through the misinformation to inform, engage, and enrage. From the attacks Americans know about to the ones anti-abortion lawmakers and groups are trying to hide, Valenti details the tactics and horrors that she's been painstakingly tracking in her acclaimed newsletter, Abortion Every Day. Abortion gives voice to women's frustration and outrage in a moment when they're fed up with being talked over and diminished. At a time when abortion is dominating the national conversation, Valenti provides the language, facts, and context readers need to feel confident when talking about the attacks on their bodies and freedom. So abortion is a handbook for the overwhelming majority of Americans who support abortion rights, whether they're seasoned activists or those just starting to learn. With the wit, expertise, and blunt moral clarity that's made her writing popular for decades, Jessica offers an essential manifesto in an urgent moment. Now I'd like to introduce the moderator, who is Beulah Osueke, Beulah Osueke, Beulah, who will be our moderator tonight. Beulah is a coach, a strategist, and an organizer. She's the executive director of New Voices for Reproductive Justice, a movement organization dedicated to building power for and alongside Black women, Black queer folks, and Black marginalized communities in Pennsylvania and Ohio. In addition to a role at New Voices, Beulah is a leadership member of Reframe and the Radical Communicators Network, two narrative organizations resourcing social justice communicators across the nation. And we know what role narratives play in our country in shaping the behaviors of different stakeholders. So again, Beulah, thank you for that critical work you're doing. So before I hand it off to Jessica and Beulah, because that's why you're all here, a few logistics. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen at any time during the event. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. Please click on CC, also live transcript, and select Show Subtitle to enable it. Should you have any technical difficulties during this conversation, please put it in the chat and one of our staff members will assist you. So thank you for all attending this event. With that, I'm thrilled to turn things over to our moderator, Beulah, for a conversation that I know will inspire and challenge us all. And Jessica, congratulations again. Thank you.
So thank you, Diane, and thank you to Women's Way for creating space for this important conversation. Jessica, congratulations again on the award. Your book has sparked vital discussions about autonomy, truth, and power. I am so excited to dive in and talk about how these ideas are shaping the fight for reproductive freedom today, and particularly in this socio-political landscape. So are you ready to get into some things?
I'm always ready. Thank you.
And I see a couple names that I recognize in the chat. So thank you all again for coming through. And I want to reiterate what Diane said. Please offer your questions. We want this to be as generative of a discussion as possible. So that being said, Jessica, my first question for you has to do with this concept of arming the choir. So in a recent book talk, I did my research on you. You responded to those who ask if your writing is just preaching to the choir by saying instead that you're arming the choir. What does arming the choir mean to you? And what essential truths or tools do you believe advocates need right now to effectively fight back and build power?
Yeah, one of the first things I noticed about the audience at the newsletter and just having done this work for a long time is how much people care about this issue and how badly they do want to be involved. I think that there is this myth that the country is evenly split on abortion or that this is a controversial issue. It's not. It hasn't been for decades. Americans feel really incredibly strongly that they want abortion to be legal. But the thing that I kept coming up against, particularly when it came to women readers and young women readers, is that they didn't feel informed. They felt nervous. They felt concerned about being talked over or diminished when they expressed their opinion about this. And so for me, this was about arming them with as much information as possible, with the arguments that they need, with the language that they need to articulate how they already felt. And I also think that this idea of sort of preaching to the choir is a way to diminish us being in community with each other. It's a way to diminish us having these important conversations with each other. And again, because there's this myth of the country being evenly split on abortion, I think sometimes we spend too much sort of precious activist energy and time trying to talk to brick walls and talking to people who were never going to change their minds, instead of building power and helping each other. And when it does come to changing minds, having been an opinion writer for a really long time, I think it's really rare that someone's like misogynist uncle is going to be convinced by a column that I write. I think what is much more likely is that his niece is going to read my column and find some language to articulate how she feels. And because he cares about his niece, he's going to have that conversation with her. And maybe
Yeah.
that will help to sway him, you know?
Yeah.
And so that is the way I think about arming the choir, is giving people sort of like the tools that they already have, but just honing them a bit.
Yeah, and I think from a reproductive justice lens, one of the co-founders of the movement, Loretta Ross, talks about the importance of knowing your role, knowing your power, knowing like what you're capable of, and also trusting those that you're working alongside to be able to fall back and rest when you need to. So that concept of arming the choir really stood out to me because, to your point, we have advocates, organizers, people that are doing critical work, soul-wrenching work, tireless work. And it's important for us to receive messages from experts and people that have the gift of articulation, to be able to like equip us and empower us in our endeavors. So I appreciate that. And you mentioned how much people care about this issue and how abortion is often falsely presented as a controversial issue, which I interpret as a dismissal and complete rebuke of widely shared opinion and feelings that are actually in support of bodily autonomy across the nation. So my second question has to do with narrative power, because clearly I'm a fan of
Yeah.
narrative power. You frame abortion as good, actually, directly challenging dominant narratives that portray abortion as controversial or morally wrong. Can you speak to the role of effective storytelling and narrative and reframing abortion, not just as a necessary healthcare, but as a necessary, positive, proactive moral good? How can we reframe this narrative from opposition groups that claim the title of the party of life? And if you want to focus on the first question, and I can re-ask the second, whatever you need.
Sure. Well, it's one of those things that I find so frustrating, because I think that sort of the mainstream, most powerful known arm of the reproductive rights movement has not done the best job at this. Like, I think that the messaging has been very much a reaction to conservatives, has been very much a reaction to Republicans, and very much about reaching this sort of like imaginary middle ground
Yeah.
when it comes to abortion, where so many of the stories that we hear are the tragic stories, right? Are the stories that are actually quite rare, very important nonetheless, but the vast majority of stories that we hear are the ones that we heard, on the campaign trail in the lead up to November, from people largely white, middle class, upper middle class women who had wanted pregnancies, who had something go terribly wrong, and who were devastated to lose their pregnancies. Again, really important stories, but they're not the only ones, right? The vast majority of people who have abortions because they don't want to be pregnant, and that is also great. That is just as morally acceptable and fine and good as any other abortion. And I think until we learn to have conversations about that, and we are sort of proactive and unapologetic about that, we're going to keep having these issues that we're having now, where Republicans will present exceptions. They're like, oh, well, this tragic problem, here's an exception. Here's an exception for that person. That's never going to work. It didn't work. Roe was not a great standard. Roe did not protect everyone. We saw a lot of horrific denials of care under Roe. We need to be able to build something that is bigger and better than what we had before, that serves all people. And so I think that there is this opportunity to reframe, to talk about abortion as a moral good. We've
Yeah.
always had the power of people on our side. We especially do now. And
Mhm.
when you ask the right questions, right, people will say they don't want government involvement in this at all. I think that there is this, again, this myth about the country being evenly split, or this myth that like, well, people support abortion, but like the later it gets in pregnancy, they don't support it. It's not true. They just don't want the government involved. And that's it. And to me, what stronger message is there? That is such a simple, clear-cut message. We don't want government involvement in this. And as I've been speaking a lot across the country, and as I go to a lot of purple states, and I'm writing about Wyoming today, and I'm thinking about places like Wyoming and Montana, like that is a message that resonates. That is a message that really resonates with people, that they don't want government involvement. And then the other thing I think of a lot when it comes to narratives is that we are entering a moment, we're entering an era where it's not going to be long before everyone in this country knows someone who's been impacted by an anti-abortion policy, whether it's because they've been denied care, they know someone who's been denied care, or because they had to wait 3 months to get a pap smear in a pro-choice state because
Yeah.
doctors are so overwhelmed, right? Um, and so this is very much an issue that people are already talking with each other about, and that we're going to continue to talk to each other about. And so there's just this huge opportunity to fight for the thing that we actually want rather than the thing we think that maybe we might be able to get.
How rich, and these are moments that we cannot afford to not be bold, right? The Voices is involved in the Ohio ballot measure that took place in 2023. And when you were talking about people not wanting the government involved, they reminded me of a slogan for a shirt we had that said, "I belong to my people, not the government," right? And you can imagine when you add the layer of race to that, right? That really resonates with people deeply. So I really appreciate you pointing out the fact that we have been reactive, therefore letting opposition set the terrain, as opposed to us leaning into values that cross state lines, cross identities, and really wanting to like be proactive and standing in the fact that a lot of people are on our side. So with that, I want to lift up the second part of that question. How do you believe that we can reclaim this narrative from opposition groups that claim the title of party of life? As an example, I personally don't say pro-life. I say forced
Mhm.
birth, right? Because even just associating pro-life, like it's a very slippery slope. So how do you think we can go about reclaiming that narrative about being for life and being for all that is good with living?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really truly absurd that they have been allowed to call themselves pro-life. Like it is forced birth. Like that's what it is. It's absurd that anyone could credibly call themselves pro-life when people are dying of sepsis, when you know even leaving aside the lack of life affirming care that they are willing to give to born children, just what is happening in pregnancy alone should be enough to disqualify them from ever calling themselves pro life.
Mm,
But I do think that there is nothing more I actually think that the ability to have an abortion and choose an abortion is extraordinarily life affirming because it means that you are in control of your body and control of your life and the trajectory of your life, right? We
yeah.
want people to be able to choose what they do next, whether it's, again, it doesn't have to be this tragic story. Like it can be, I want to go to school. I want to move states. I want to take this job that I wouldn't be able to take if I was pregnant. I want to be a better parent to my existing kids, which is one of the top reasons that people give for ending a pregnancy. We know that the majority of people who seek out pregnancies are already seek out abortions are already parents.
Yep.
Um, that is life affirming. That is pro life. We are talking about people choosing the course of their own lives, um, and choosing that sort of freedom. To me, it's just so obvious. And I do think that that's a message that resonates beyond reproductive rights and justice groups. I really do.
Yeah.
Um, if we would just put some power and money behind it, right? Like it's only going to work if we have buy-in from the people who are overwhelmingly determining these messages on a national stage.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting that you talked about like resource, which is why it was important to ask the question about narrative, because I think oftentimes people, there's like an over reliance on voting and policy, and those are avenues, but there's also narrative and cultural strategy that's the connective tissue between these moments in our society. So thank you for that. And you also mentioned about the middle ground. And a lot of what you shared makes me think we have a responsibility to call out the contradictions of opposition, right? We should paint a picture for a better way and then show the steps how to get there. Someone does not believe in our inherent right to dictate what happens to our body. There is no middle ground, right? If someone cannot honor our full humanity and the multitudes of identities that we hold, there is no middle ground, right? So I really appreciate you naming some of the missteps that we've had and also calling out the opportunity that we have ahead of us. There is persuasion, there is mobilization, there are tactics, there are strategies, but there is no middle ground with people who don't see our full humanity. So thank you for that. And speaking of our full humanity, my next question is about bodily autonomy and the myriad of ways in which oppression shows up. So in your book, you write that asserting our bodies don't belong to us endangers everything, especially when systems that oppress women are sustained not only by those in power, but also by members of marginalized communities who, consciously or not, reinforce these coercive and inequitable structures. How do these intersecting forces shape society and politics? And what implications do they have for the ongoing fight to reclaim control over our own bodies?
I mean, that's the question, right? Like that is the big question. It's so I almost get like a little emotional thinking about it, honestly, and I think it actually it for me it like harkens back to something you said about like the limitations of policy and law,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Like I don't need, and I've been thinking about this a lot since I had a conversation recently with the folks at Shout Your Abortion, which is like a fantastic group. And I've been thinking a lot about how we don't need policies and laws to tell us we're human beings. We don't need, right? Like it almost feels like degrading that we're in this position of having to beg people for votes to consider us constitutional human beings, to ask people to not allow the law to kill us. It feels so absurd and so distressing, and that's one of the reasons I think when we're talking about narrative, when we're talking about community, really getting back to that place of remembering like we we don't need, yes, we need policies in some ways, right? We're always going to be there to help each other get care no matter what. And that's why I'm so appreciative of, abortion funds and groups like Shout Your Abortion, where bodily autonomy is at the heart of all of this. And remembering that no matter what the law says, no matter what the policy says, we don't need those laws or policies to tell us that we're human beings who deserve respect and care and abortions, that we know that we're human beings who deserve that bodily autonomy. And so we are going to make sure that we are able to get the care that we need. And I think for me, especially right now, and especially in a moment when everything feels so bleak,
Yeah.
um, remembering that and leaning into bodily autonomy as a fundamental truth, not something that we need to ask permission for or that we need, um, justification for, legal or otherwise. Remembering that as a fundamental truth, um, and and ensuring that our activism is grounded in that, right, with each other and with the way that we're sort of positioning the issue to other people as well, and like reminding people. It's one of the most important things, I think, that the message that we can give to other people, and the message I try to give to my readers, is you will get like someone is there in your community no matter where you live. Someone is there working their asses off to make sure that you can get the care that you need, because we fundamentally believe in that bodily autonomy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Shout Your Abortion, there's We Testify. I mean, I always I enjoy these like communities of practice that put people at ease, right? That like the short storytelling, it is so critical, particularly when you're engaging an act of self-care and love that is stigmatized or demonized, right? It's like, how am I being demonized for caring for myself, looking out for myself, for my family? So thank you for offering that. And also, thank you for uplifting the point that we do not need policies and or laws to tell us that we're human beings, right? Thank you for lifting up the fact that this work is degrading because a lot of times advocacy work, organizing work is very draining. And I don't think it's the work alone, it's the fact that we're having to like push for this notion that we are human, that we deserve basic rights in a way that it can feel very emptying. So thank you for that. We're at a moment where we are constantly being confronted with the limitations of legality. So, as you mentioned, being there for each other, recognizing and actually leaning into the reality that community is the answer is critical for us. So, the next question explores organized abandonment and how we show up for each other in
Mm,
spite of, oh yeah, how we show up for each other in spite
okay.
of, right? Because in your book, you expose the reality of millions that are living in a double desert states with no access to both abortion and quality maternal care, alongside a rising wave of attacks on birth control linked to regressive gender ideologies like the trad wife movement, right? How do
Yeah.
these overlapping crises compound harm? And what key insights should advocates keep in mind about the interconnectedness of these battles?
Yeah. I mean, it's it's one of the issues I think is that we're not really I shouldn't say we. I should say like the Democrats, like a lot of the mainstream conversation, I think, around repro rights is not taking that holistic view of what is actually happening, right? What we're seeing right now, all of the attacks on reproductive rights is not just, yes, it is a war on women for sure, but it's so much bigger than that. It is about this reassertion of, white supremacist patriarchy. It is about this desire to keep women in the domestic sphere, but to also reinforce this traditional gender binary. There's a reason that we are seeing attacks on trans rights come alongside attacks on abortion rights. Like in states like Nebraska, the abortion ban is literally the same law that the ban on gender affirming care is, right? Like they see these issues as inextricable, and but we're not fighting for them as inextricable, and so
Hmm.
they have those very much together. And as you mentioned, at the same time, we have things like the trad wife movement, which is this culturally, I want to make clear, this is not like a natural thing that cropped up, right? Like this is a well-funded, um, invented invented cultural phenomenon
Yeah.
that happened very much deliberately at the same time that conservatives rolled back the right to abortion. What better way? I wrote this in the book and I say this often, like what better way to convince young women growing up in this world without abortion rights that it's good for them actually than to say, oh well, don't you know birth control is bad for you, and don't you know you're going to be much happier at home. And like one of the things that's been so frustrating to me to watch is the way that they have been effectively able to co-opt anti-capitalist conversations when it
Hmm.
comes to trad wives and recognize in a way that like we haven't done a good enough job in publicly, recognize that for a younger generation, for young women, they see what's happening. They see what's happening with capitalism. They see 9 to 5 jobs, and they're like, that does not look great to me. And you have a movement that is offering them something different, right? It's not a great thing that they're offering them, but they're offering them something. They're offering them an alternative. They're saying, we recognize that this seems really bad, that this is not appealing to you. And so, how about you try this, right? They are recognizing something I think that is incredibly vital, and they're actually proactively speaking to it. What they're offering is regressive, but a lot of people don't realize that, right? And
Hmm.
so we need to be in a better position, I think, of not, again, not just being reactive, not just fighting back against something, but offering something, recognizing what the world really looks like for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and speaking to that. And again, instead of going back to like, we want to bring back Roe, we just want to go back to that's not what people want. People want something that is forward looking.
Yeah, and I'm just appreciating the richness in your responses. I'm living right now, help people in the chat are
Oh,
living.
thank you.
Yeah, because like as you were talking, I don't remember exactly what you said, but in my head, I was thinking beyond boss girls, right? Which is like women marketed
Yeah,
capitalism, right? So I'm also thinking about you saying we need to apply a holistic view of what's actually happening. And to your point, like I love the connection that you make with like the reinforcement of a restrictive gender binary and how that uh, funnels into or informs other ways of being. Because when I'm able to think about it on a macro scale, there's this concerted and coordinated and well resourced and well researched effort to keep women in the domestic space, right? Which reinforces, to your point, this restrictive gender binary, but it's also an effort to keep us small and contained in mind, body, and spirit, right? That combined with the increasing economic disparities, with everything that's happening, we are intended to succumb to defeatism and hopelessness. But you explore truth to win. So that's my next question for you. For those that are eager to engage in reproductive justice activism, but unsure
Mhm.
where to begin, what core
Mhm.
truths we use to win would you offer as a foundation? How do you confront and dismantle the damaging narrative that pregnancy is a form of punishment for gender minorities and women who step outside of prescribed social roles?
Yeah. I think the one of the most important things that we can recognize for people who want to help do something is that you don't have to start from scratch, right? I think, especially for people for whom maybe this is the first time they're thinking about this issue, or this is their first coming to it, they're first thinking about how to be active. You don't have to start from scratch. There's work that's already been done. There's work in every single community that you can tap into, that you can become a part of a community, right? I think that is the other thing that is so hugely powerful. It can feel really isolating and really alone. And that's certainly something I've heard from a lot of people in different parts of the country who don't necessarily live in a big city, who don't necessarily have easily accessible feminist groups or pro choice groups right near them. Remembering that there are these built in communities and built in work that you can tap into. I would say that is the best place to start. And I think that that helps to maybe not cure, but like helps some of that hopelessness, right? Like you're not alone. You're not starting from scratch. There's a tremendous amount of work that's already been done. And that's the other thing I try to remind people, you just may not hear about all of it, right? You're only hearing about a certain kind of activism. You're only hearing about a certain kind of work. We don't hear a lot about some of the most like innovative, groundbreaking work that is happening on a local level, that's happening on the ground. And so that is what, I think is the most important thing for people to find. I think abortion funds are a terrific place to start. I think for people who want to do something beyond, volunteering for an abortion fund or donating for an abortion fund, I often tell people, you know, look as local and as narrow as you can, right?
Mm,
Look,
mm,
if it's not what's happening in your state, like see what the ordinances are in your community. I think that sometimes we forget like the sometimes seemingly mundane stuff is where so much of the action and strategy happens. See what's happening in your school. If you're a college student, what is your health center's policy on birth control, on abortion, right? What are your, I just heard about this week. What are your zoning laws right now in Virginia? They're trying to, one city council is, abortion is legal in Virginia. They're trying to stop abortion clinics from operating by creating zoning ordinances that say you can't operate within 1,000 feet of parks, libraries, daycare centers, music, right? Like that is where we need so much time and attention because that is actually those are the places that are going to impact people's lives the most. There's what the law says, and then there's actual access, right? And if
yep,
it doesn't matter if the law says abortion is legal, if abortion clinics can't open up.
yep.
And so there's all of these opportunities to like really get involved on this like tangible micro level that is so incredibly helpful.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. And you touched on accessibility. So I wanted to dig
Yeah.
deeper on that. We might not realize how dismissive society is of disabled folks until we break a bone and rely on crutches and find ourselves trying to enter a building with no elevator, right? So
Mm,
to your point, it's not just about the quality, it's not just about the legality, it's not just about the provision. What about accessibility?
mm,
So you write very powerfully about how the anti-choice movement has shaped a culture that sees care and autonomy
mm.
as something that women must earn rather than inherently deserve. So can you talk about how this idea of deservedness and who is seen as worthy of care, safety, or even compassion shows up in the
Mm.
fight for abortion rights and reproductive freedom?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different ways, right? I think that on the one hand, there is the way that fundamentally the anti-abortion movement just doesn't see women as human, right? And not deserving of care and help, especially if they're not fitting into this like really specific narrow role of good mother. If you are, if you want an abortion, if you, even if your life is at risk, if you want an abortion, you're bad, you don't deserve that care, right? We see that with exceptions, we see that with rape exceptions, we see that with incest exceptions. I think that there's that, there's that side of it. And then I think the other side in terms of thinking about disability, um, the anti-abortion movement has really co-opted disability rights in this specific way, again, where I feel like we haven't risen to the occasion. They are pointing out, look, they're talking about fetal abnormalities or fetal abnormalities. They are not addressing disability rights with abortion. They're
Yeah,
not addressing, like that is a big deal when you have, pro-choicers, when one of their primary messages is we want to make sure people can have abortions when there's serious fetal abnormalities, like that does not go over well with the disability rights community, which
right,
is reasonable and
right,
correct. And it
right,
also gets back to this idea of like, why is that our message? Why isn't our message bodily autonomy, right? Like it doesn't have to, we don't have to lean on all of these places where it's like, well, of course they want an abortion for that. That's not helpful.
right.
Everyone should be able to access care because they're a human being who gets to determine the course of their own life and gets to determine what happens to their body. And so I
Yeah.
think that there is this more nuanced um, way that we could be talking about it and listening to other communities, right? Like I think that that is sort of the other thing. So much of the abortion rights work that is the most popular or is the most known is electoral, and it's around voting, and it's around messages for politicians. And we're not, again, tapping into the more local work, how people are really feeling about it beyond I want to vote for this person or I want to vote for that person, right? Like let's actually talk about what this feels like for people on an interpersonal level.
Right. It makes me, I don't know if I have the quoting correct. So correct me if
Mm.
I'm there's those billboards that went up that said the most dangerous place for Black children is in the womb. Like, what was the actual statement?
Yeah.
Do you remember what that
I
was?
think it was I think that that's actually right. It's like the most dangerous, yeah, the most
Place for
dangerous
Black children
place,
is
yeah,
right. And so
and
like
genocide and yeah.
right. And so like when you say that, like I just instantly that those billboards popped up because even before I was in the repro movement, I remember those billboards, right? And so what I'm hearing you say is that there's this very strategic and intentional like criminalization of Black women. Like it's all compounded. And so when you see it, it's like, actually, yeah, right. As opposed to like having the tools to be curious and investigate that. So I wanted to look that up. Also
Yeah.
want to lift up what you were talking about. What I heard you talking about was the rationalizing of eugenics, right?
Mm,
Like, who wants to hear? Yeah, if your child is shaping up this way, that's not the rationale that we're looking to uplift because we are discarding folks that are already discarded by our society, right? So, to your earlier point about the necessity of lifting up the interconnectedness of our issues, that's what I'm hearing. We don't want to discard anyone, and a better way, a better world that accommodates all people is possible. That has to be our messaging as opposed to thinking we can discard of this group or that identity. So, thank you for that.
yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Thank you.
Well, you put it a beautiful way as well. So I just put it beautifully back to you. So I want to lift up the fact that we're about halfway through our questions. I hope you all are enjoying yourself. I want to remind you to please put your questions in the Q&A if you have one. We already have received the submission, so thank you so much, Rachel, for your question that you offered. We will be sure to uplift it toward the end of our discussion. So if you have some questions that are popping up for you, please feel free to submit them, and we'll be sure to carve out enough time to get to them. All right. So second half. The next question is about adapting our strategy for a multi-faceted fight, which I think we've really touched upon those themes throughout our conversation. So your book vividly documents multi-front assaults from abortion bans to birth control restrictions and educational misinformation that work together to confine women to reproductive servitude. How do you see advocates and movements evolving their strategies to meet this broad, coordinated political offensive? What do you
Yeah.
believe is essential for building resilience in this complex fight?
Yeah, I love this question because this is, I mean, honestly, this is a big part of what I'm trying to do at the newsletter, because these fights are everywhere. They're coming from a million different directions, excuse me, and they are taking advantage of the fact that the reproductive rights, health, and justice movements are overwhelmed, are stretched thin. We are in a position right now where we're just trying to like get to the next day. We're just
Yeah.
trying to make sure that like that person and that person can get the care that they need. We are not in a position where we have the ability to think 50 years ahead, to think 10 years ahead, to think like a year ahead. And so part of what I'm trying to do is raise awareness around all of these attacks, around what the language is, around what we need to be paying attention to, what kind of legislative trends that are coming up. I've been writing, just to give a couple of examples, I've been, in terms of education, I've been warning about this thing called Baby Olivia bills, where in multiple states, Republicans have passed this legislation that mandates anti-abortion propaganda videos be shown in public school classrooms. And in order to, so with sex education, right, you can, parents can opt out. In order to get around that opt out, they're putting them in science classes because you can't opt out of science class. So they are really thinking in this like very deliberate way about how to indoctrinate and how to cultivate the next generation of anti-abortion voters. And they're putting a lot of effort towards that because they know that young people are the most pro-choice demographic in the country. They know that they need young people. And they know that, especially when it comes to young women, the Democrats take those votes for granted.
Yep.
They think that they're always going to be there. And so that's who they're after. So like starting to recognize in terms of education where we're at. And also I think for me, trying to recognize it's hard because everything does feel so bleak. But there are worst case scenarios than what we see now. And we need to be clear-headed about that. Something I'm writing about tonight is about the way that conservatives are laying the groundwork to do away with exceptions for women's lives, right? Like exceptions are already sort of, ridiculous and you can't really access them. But there are, in every state, there's an exception that says, in order to save someone's life, you can give them an abortion. And right now they are pushing forward language about I'm trying to think of the easiest way to explain this, about what they call maternal fetal separations. And what they really mean is C-sections, right? And what they're saying is that abortion is never necessary to save someone's health or life because you can just give them a C-section. It doesn't matter if they're 13 or 14 weeks, doesn't matter if the fetus has no chance of survival. This is their way of sort of forwarding this idea that abortion is never medically necessary and forwarding this idea of divorcing abortion from healthcare, right? We are so overwhelmed. No one is paying attention, not no one, but like not a lot of people are paying attention to these random little terms in bills, especially bills that won't pass. But slowly but surely over the last few years, they are codifying this idea into bill after bill, into policy after policy. They are normalizing this language. They are normalizing the idea that it's okay to give someone who's 15, 16 weeks pregnant a C-section instead of a standard abortion procedure. And so I think a lot about what's next for them, because they're not stopping here. Yeah, they got what they wanted by overturning Roe. That's not the end, right? Like what's next?
Right.
And I think that we need to be able to have a conversation about that in a way that isn't, people get depressed and they're like, oh, let's not go there. We have to.
Right.
We have to be clear-eyed about this. We have to see what's coming down the line. Let's not be surprised. Let's not be, shocked when the next attack happens. Let's be prepared, and call them out ahead of time.
Yeah, and I'm not like a medical expert. I'm not a legal expert. I'm an organizer. I know my role, and I receive insights from experts such as yourself and look to embed that in my efforts. But when you're talking about the limits and you're talking about opposition looking to erode like any kind of like justification and rationale, which is why, to your point, we need to stop. We need to stop limiting ourselves, right, and be just as bold, if not bolder. I instantly thought about Amber Nicole Thurman in Georgia, which when I was talking with a lot of my colleagues was a gross experimentation, right? And like also I'm thinking about you talking about normalizing this language, right? You talked about these fights being everywhere. I didn't even think about these videos showing up in science classes, which you can't opt out of. I mean, yeah. You also talk about this coming from a million different directions. And so thank you for lifting that up. And I think something that's been a common thread of everything that we've been talking about, but I want to ask very pointedly, it's about defense versus offense, right? As Diane shared, I'm a coach, right? So I'm always like strategizing, like, here's what's happening here. And for me, even in the electoral strategy field, right, where there's this concept of block and build, it's not enough to block regressive legislation. What are we building? It's not enough to point out what the problem is with how things are. What do we aspire towards? And it's more difficult to think about what is possible because we're expending so much energy fighting what is and trying to survive, right? So I think that I think this like notion that joy and proactiveness and dreaming and visioning has to be just as essential to our liberation efforts as fighting against what exists. And so I do want to ask you about defense versus offense.
Yeah.
So with the anti-choice movement shifting their framing towards parental rights and education control, which we've hit on, as more socially acceptable tactics, how can progressive movements move beyond reacting defensively to attacks and towards establishing a proactive, visionary reproductive justice agenda that sets the narrative as well as policy terms?
Yeah. I mean, that's everything, right? And it's not just, as you said, it's not just about policy, it's about narrative, it's about messaging, it's about culture, about the way that we're talking about this issue. And I think there are a couple of different ways we can go about it and a couple of different conversations I've been having with folks. I think to get like nitty gritty, for example, in terms of defense versus offense, we saw all of these ballot measure efforts, right, in the lead up to November. And I have so much admiration and respect for the folks who did all of this incredible organizing work on the ground. But let's also be real that like what a lot of those states did was codify viability limits, right? Like, like that's what we did. Like we fought within that existing system. We fought to get back row. We did not fight for something new. And that came from a place of fear. That came from a place of accepting this idea that abortion is controversial. People are not going to go for it if we, put forward a ballot measure that says no government interference.
Yeah.
I really, really strongly disagree. I really do believe that if we had ballot measures, amendments, local policies that said this is no place for government involvement, I think that it would do incredibly well, again, because it is fighting for something. I think that if we were to push right now, one of the things I would love to see people push on a state level and a national level is a decriminalization, anti-criminalization effort that proactively says we do not arrest people for their pregnancy outcomes.
Right.
Period.
Right.
Period. Right? Miscarriage, stillbirth, and because that's what we're seeing happen. Like that is, it doesn't matter what anti-abortion activists say that like they don't go, that is what is happening. Let's have a proactive, policy that says we don't put up with that, and let them say that they disagree with it. Let Republicans say, no, we reserve the right to arrest someone for their miscarriage. Let them say it out loud, right? Like there's this opportunity that we have to really hold their feet to the fire that I think that we're not taking.
Yeah.
And so those are sort of like the two big things that I'm thinking about. And again, in terms of parental rights, one of the things that they are focusing on so much with parental rights, because abortion rights are so popular, they're focusing on parental rights and this idea that like you need to be able to have involvement if your kid has an abortion, but more than that, it's all about gender affirming care, right? Like that's their big thing, and they are attaching attacks on gender affirming care, as I said, to attacks on abortion rights. And in every single pro-choice ballot measure campaign, the anti-abortion side, they were talking about gender affirming care for minors more than they were talking about abortion, because they believe that that is where they're going to be able to win over voters. Why aren't we talking about that? Why are we not like being so proactive about like, no, this is a necessary, right? Not reactive, but proactively saying young people deserve to have health care, they deserve to have life affirming, gender affirming care. I think that is something that we could do very easily, and need to like get over this weirdo anti-trans hump that the Democrats have and like just do it. And I don't think that people, not only because it's the right thing to do, right? Like that should be enough. I don't think people realize how dangerous this is when you have conservatives laying the groundwork and passing laws that say gender affirming care for minors is not okay because hormones are bad for young people and we don't know what it's going to do to young people's bodies. What do you think they're going to do next? They're going to ban birth control for teenagers, because those are hormones too. Like these things, you can't separate them. And so, it's the right thing to do, but also it's the strategic thing to do.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you mentioned the dismissal of like disabled folks. I forgot what the exact strategy or population you mentioned, but essentially we're talking about this rigidity, this fear. And I'm just kind of curious, like, what do you believe anchors this fear, right? Like for me, as someone who the reproductive justice framework changed my life, and I now can't see another way, right? Um, Octavia Butler tells us there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. And I think recognizing that there are new suns can be very unsettling because we're socialized to believe this is the only way. And so when we have visionaries, I say there's actually so many other ways, there's multitudes, right? And to people like us, that can seem exciting. Let's do it. But there's people that operate even against their own self interest because at least oppression is familiar, right? So, from your perspective, I'm so curious. What do you think anchors this fear from the political realm to the communal to like parents? I'm just generally curious what you think is at the root.
Yeah, I think it's shame. I think that that shame is such a central part of the conservative agenda and mindset, and that it is also so embedded in our politics and culture, like especially when it comes to women, especially when it comes to marginalized identities and good girls versus bad girls. And when you throw in sex into the mix and bodies and abortions and blood and periods, right? There is so much shame involved.
Right.
And I think that that's a really difficult thing for people to get over. And I think that people carry so much of their own shame around it, and that having these sort of like limitations is almost like this self-protective thing. Like I've seen this a lot with um, watching people's reaction to the criminalization of people for their pregnancy outcomes, right? Like watching, I've seen this like in TikTok comments where someone will be arrested for disposing of their miscarriage in a certain way. And the immediate reaction is I would never throw away my miscarriage like that. I would never do that. I would do it a different way. And of course, like, first of all, you have no idea what you would do in that situation. It's shame. It's this need to distinguish yourself as a good person in opposition to that other person. And I think that is so hard for people to break free from. And until we do that and we are able to like lose that deep sense of shame around our bodies and sex and identity, it's going to be really difficult.
Man, Jessica, you about to have me on my chair shouting, but I'm approaching middle age, so I'm afraid to do so. I don't want to fall. But I love what you said about shame being such a central part and core strategy of the conservative agenda, right? Because
Yeah.
when I think you actually took me back 10 years ago when I entered movement, and when I realized that my misfortunes were not because of my personal failings, but because of systemic design, it was illuminating, right? And I
Yeah.
felt this shedding of shame because of sexual identity, gender identity, racial identity, my parents being immigrants. I released it. It took time, but I released it, right? And so I really want to thank you for lifting that up, because radicalization is not something that happens to us, it's something that we accept. And it
Mm,
requires introspection. It requires us to sit and deal with the things that happen to us that should not have happened to us, right? And it requires this taking charge of our personal lives, but then also loving our neighbors as ourselves and equally caring for the least of these as we would ourselves. So thank you for lifting that up, because my entrance to movement work was through faith-based organizing. And I'm so
mm.
grateful for that, because I got to shed a lot of toxic theology. And now that I've been introduced to a God of righteous anger, I'm like, go tell it on the mountain. And I really appreciate you naming that shame, because so much of what keeps us rigid and in these containers that are way too small for us, so we keep reducing ourselves to fit, is thinking that what has happened to us and what we navigate is our fault, right? So
100%.
that's also a core cultural strategy and narrative strategy. Put the onus of responsibility on systems, right? Not on ourselves. And we should give forgiveness and grace ourselves. So thank you for that. Um, Earlier you mentioned the ballot measure work leading up to 2024,
Mm,
and now we're here, right?
yeah.
So since abortion, our bodies, their lives, and the truths we used to win was published, the political and cultural landscape around abortion has continued to shift. From new ballot measures to changing state laws and rhetoric, what has surprised you most about how the conversation and the fight has evolved?
Ooh, that's really hard. Very little surprises me anymore, I have to say. It's hard to shock me, I think, because I am so like deeply embedded in doing this every day. I I will say I am pleasantly surprised always um by righteous anger and by
Mm,
people's right. Like I am always, I'm not, surprised is not the right word, but my capacity for surprise grows when I see people's anger. People are so angry, understandably so, reasonably so, rightfully so. People are so angry about this, and I think that that is actually like almost the next step after shame, where it's like that anger directed inward moving to anger directed outward,
right.
where I think that a lot of people are having their eyes opened in this moment, and maybe folks who didn't feel like they had to pay attention to this issue before, who now are really understanding what this is all about. There's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of I will say I'm very pleasantly surprised, the anger of young women, like the after election night, seeing young women's reaction across the board, and how they were able to really effectively name what the problem was, that it what they weren't looking inward, they were saying like, this is a problem of conservative men and men wanting control over us, and I'm tired of it and I'm over it, and really rejecting that. And I think that that has been nice to see, and nice to see the way that people are really interested in mobile. I mean, the number one question I get when I'm speaking at colleges or anywhere is like, okay, what do I like? I want to do something. I want to be of use. I want to be helpful.
Yeah.
How can I do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you all for the comments in the chat and the compliments for how the conversation is going. Thank you all for the questions. Since that invitation, we have received 3 additional questions, so I'll make sure that we get to all of those. And I want to offer appreciation, Jessica, for you talking about shame and then righteous anger. I think similar to the tools such as the Overton window and the 8 stages of grief. If you're not familiar with the Overton window, please look it up. It changed my life as well. A lot of things changed my life, apparently. But I wonder if there's a tool or a graph that talks about the continuum
Mm,
of radicalization, right? Because you named
Mm.
shame, you named righteous anger, and there's a cornucopia of emotions and realities that we navigate on our ways towards not only recognizing that liberated futures are within reach, but also that
mm,
we play a part in leading us there. So thank you for that. Um, it also reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. Your response to failure determines your capacity for success, right? So, even though we're in bleak times, what I've also been hearing is we are the underdogs, right? Now is the time to be bold, ambitious, courageous. Why not, right? So my last question for you before we get to the questions from the Q&A, and again, want to invite people to get their questions in if you haven't yet. This is about building towards something better.
mm,
In your book, you offer relatable examples and clear contrast with the opposition, outlining an opportunity to build something better culturally and legally. What clear, relatable call to action or message would you want listeners on this call to hold on to about the road ahead and also the courage that our movement must summon today?
mm. I do think it is this idea that there are people in every state and every community who are there to help. I think I tell the story sometimes, but I've told this a few times, but it's meaningful to me. A few weeks after Florida enacted its 6-week abortion ban, I went down to visit the state to meet with some activists, to visit some abortion clinics. And it was because the ban had just passed. The first clinic I went to was very, very empty. Like
Mm,
the waiting room is empty. They're taking us through the building, procedure room, everything is empty. And then they took us all the way back to this like back room, sort of cramped. Um, I don't think there were windows, but there were about a dozen or so young women, all with headsets on, taking phone calls, booking bus tickets, getting hotel rooms. One person was like texting emotional support to a patient who had never been on a plane before. And to
mm,
me, that was like, it was such an incredible reminder that no matter what the law says, no matter what is happening, there are rooms full of activists in every single community, in every single state, who
yeah,
are there making sure that people can get the care that they need.
yeah,
A few weeks later, I got a message from a 15-year-old girl, and my daughter is 15, and so it just and she was scared, and she's saying, "I'm scared. Like what is going on? This is horrific. Like, how do I keep going? How do I fight? How do I like live in this world when this is so scary?"
mm,
And because I had just been in that room, the ability to tell her there are rooms full of people in every single community who are working to make sure you will be safe, and to have that be true was everything to me. And so I think that reminding ourselves of that, reminding that we are just surrounded by community, surrounded by people who are there to help, that we are here to help each other. And one of the things that Shout Your Abortion says that I love, it's like, we will save us, right? Yes, we're going to fight for laws, we're going to fight for policies, but in the meantime, we are there and we will save us. I think that that is the most important thing that we can remember.
Thank you so much for that. And I think concluding our official set of questions before I get to the Q&A from the audience, um, your response made me think that nothing is too small, right? Oftentimes there's this intentional like flooding, you know, we're made to believe we're too small, we don't matter. And so I love you offering that reflection because it's critical and it reminds me that transformation happens in a million subtle shifts,
Mm,
breakthroughs and acts of resistance, right? So I really want to implore people, nothing is too small, right? And you never know who's witnessing your act of resistance and what that might inspire them to do. So thank you, Jessica, for such a rich conversation. Thank you for entertaining all of my questions for you. Um,
thank you. They were great.
Thank you. Well, great material. So I'm not sure if people are comfortable with their full name being read, so I'm just going to mention your first name. And again, thank you all for the 5 people that submitted questions, or 4. All right, so the first one comes from Rachel, and she says, "At times, I feel that our current administration and the times we're living in are so monumentally far from the policies that would grant
Mm.
women and minorities true autonomy and access to adequate reproductive care, and ultimately restore our humanity in this country. What do you see as the path to rectifying this? How do
Mm.
you envision the future of this nation when it comes to abortion access?"
Yeah, I think that that's a totally fair and understandable reaction, that the policies and beliefs of this administration are so far from reproductive freedom, even like on a baseline ability. I think that what's important to remember is that this administration is not reflective of what Americans want in the least. And I think that's why I talk a lot about abortion rights as a democracy issue. That, like, yes, this is a rights issue, this is a health issue, but this is also a democracy issue. And I think one of the best things that we can do to push forward with abortion rights is fight for a healthy democracy, right? And to fight back against the attacks on democracy. And I think one of the best examples of what that looks like for abortion is what's happening with ballot measures. Like in every single state where voters have passed a pro-choice measure, Republican leaders have worked to undo it, worked to ignore the will of voters.
Yeah.
And this is why one of the things I'm so passionate about is within the Democratic mainstream, and when it comes to political pundits and legislators, they need to understand that abortion isn't like this side issue. It's not a culture war issue. This is central, because if you want to see the attacks on democracy, look at what's happening with abortion rights. If we had more of the Democratic mainstream paying attention to what is going on with abortion rights, they would be clued in to a lot of these bigger issues. And so I think for us, it's fighting for democracy. And I think it is getting those folks in power, getting our representatives, getting media outlets, media pundits, the people with the most influential voices to understand that abortion rights is a democracy issue, and fighting for abortion rights is one of the best ways that we can fight for a healthy democracy.
Yeah, and in a nonpartisan way, not only would they be clued in, they would not be clueless, because I mean, that's why I have people struggling for messaging, for brand identities, because like your strategies are not rooted in community and reality. So you're having to pull people along as opposed to walk
Yeah.
alongside the pulse of your constituents. So thank you so much for that question, Rachel. So our next question comes from Mark. Mark says, "I'm the father of a 14-year-old. How would you recommend I begin a conversation with my daughter about this issue? What does she need to know now to be prepared to protect her choices in
Mm.
the future?"
I love that question. I think I would start with figuring out how much she already knows, right? Like, I think as mom to a 15-year-old, I think that kids know a lot. And so it's also, what do you think about this? What do you think abortion is? How do you think abortion is performed?
Yeah.
Right? It's one of those, I mean, really, you would be surprised to know how many, teenage girls think abortion is like a C-section, right?
Hmm.
Like, we have to be willing to get into the nitty-gritty conversations about like what this really looks like, what this issue really is. And so I think starting from that place, finding out what she knows, um, working on debunking misinformation if there is any, but then also coming at it from a very positive point of view. I've always talked to my daughter about abortion as like a pretty normalized health thing when she was young, you know, as a natural part of conversation. When she asked, "Oh, did you ever think about like having other babies, or like why don't I have a brother or sister?" when she was young, I said, "Well, I got really sick with you, and so I did get pregnant again, but you can have something called an abortion, and the doctor didn't think it was safe for me to be pregnant, and so I wasn't pregnant anymore." And
Yeah.
to me, like, making that like a very normalized part of conversation is a great way to start. I think in terms of practical solutions and practical conversations, one of the things I'm thinking about a lot as my daughter gets a little bit older and is going to go to college, Are where are we talking about sending her to college, right? Like, I'm not going to send her to a state where I'm not 100% confident she's going to be able to be treated as a human being in a hospital or by the law, and having those, conversations with her. And when it comes to sex education too, I think we can count on, depending on where you live, schools will tell our kids a certain amount of information, even in the best places in New York, right? Like, if you have great sex education, they're not necessarily going to learn about abortion. I think having those conversations is a great idea. And I recommend, for just on a super practical level, if you have anyone in your house who has the capacity for pregnancy, I think that you should have abortion medication in your medicine cabinet, period. I have three doses in my medicine cabinet, just in case. You don't need to be pregnant or seeking an abortion currently in order to get abortion medication. It's called advanced provision. You can order it now to have it, just in case later down the road. We're seeing an unprecedented attack on abortion pills. Obviously, this has been happening for a long time, but over the last month or so specifically, there is like a real concerted effort to roll back the ability to ship abortion medication. And so I don't know that we're going to be able to get advanced provision abortion medication for that long. And so I think mine is probably close to expiring. I'm going to order some more abortion medication. If you have anyone in the house who has the capacity for pregnancy, you should have a couple doses of abortion pills.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Mark. Our next question comes from Daniela, and it's a two-parter. And I can read the full thing, and then if you need me to uplift the second question again, I can.
Sure.
So Daniela says, conservatives have been very successful in forcing a term discussion and abortion discussions to sway otherwise reasonably pro-freedom/choice people and drag them into absurdist corner discussions. Even perfectly reasonable people have fallen for I am more comfortable with having limits, and why don't we adopt a common sense solution? Working with the assumption that these people genuinely do not hate women and are expressing a genuine moral concern from their perspective, if misguided, what is the best way to respond to these types of comments and redirect? And I'm actually going to stop there because that was a lot, and then I'll save for the second question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's something that we absolutely do need to address, because this is not something I think that pro-choice politicians have been particularly good at. I think they have been reactive. I think they have taken the bait. I think that they have gone straight to the that's very rare. It's only in health. Like, let's not do that.
Yeah.
I think it's, who do you want making these decisions? Like, we can all recognize that pregnancy, the thing I say quite often is, pregnancy is too complicated to legislate, period. There is no way to safely, morally, ethically legislate pregnancy. You cannot. Who do you want making these decisions? Someone and their doctor, or a government official, right? I think we can all agree that it should not be the government official. And so that's all we need to know. And I think when people sort of push and say, well, but don't you think about, let's ask questions. Why?
Right.
Why? Why? Talk to me about who is this person? Who do you think is seeking out later abortion care, and why don't you want them to get care? What does that look like, right? And I think being open to really just pushing forward and having the nitty-gritty conversation and asking people questions is a good way to go about it. But I think in terms of just pure messaging, getting back to the this is not something that the government has any place in or can. And honestly, one of the best sort of pieces of evidence that we have is the last 3 years, right? There are limitations in all of these different states. They are not working. They are not working well. They are hurting people. They are killing people. And so if we ever wanted evidence that this was working absolutely terribly, we have it.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I am a big fan of analogies and quotes. So I hope I don't butcher this, but I love you insisting that we ask why, get to the root of it. Similar to when someone tells a racist or a sexist joke, can you explain that joke? I don't get it, right? Get to the root of it, right? And it makes me think about an analogy someone offered. They said, oftentimes we see leaves and branches, and they're comparing that to people's like conclusions and what they're saying, right? And we respond to that. And they say you're upside down. Get to the root of it, right? So, like that way of thinking, that line of questioning, it's coming from somewhere. And if we can practice patience, inquiring where, and to Daniela's point, not assuming this person hates women or hates me, but they've maybe succumbed to effective marketing or messaging, or this is how they grew up. That's one of the things I love most about organizing. There's potential to persuade anybody. So the second part of Daniela's question is, in admiring how patient and strategic conservatives have been in overturning Roe, what is ultimately the equivalent, smart, strategic, long-term solution for the pro-choice vision?
That's a complicated, that's a difficult that's a difficult question. I do think for me it is just an end to government interference, right? If we're talking about like what is our long-term goal, I think it is politically policy wise an end to any sort of government interference with pregnancy, whether you're talking about abortion, birth control, or criminalizing someone for the way that they lose their pregnancy or what they do after they lose their pregnancy. And so I do think it is just like a complete eradication of government involvement um, whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I think that it is this cultural push for understanding abortion as a moral good, for getting so far away from this safe, legal, and rare framework that we've had for so long. Um, and being able to say it's a great thing that people are able to get abortions, right? Like the other day, anti-abortion activists were really upset that these new statistics came out showing that Illinois, New York, and New Jersey had the highest rates of teen abortions. And they're like, see, look, like these pro-choice states and they're high. Why don't we have the ability to say, I am so glad that young people in New York, New Jersey, and Illinois were able to
Right.
get the care that they need and want? Like, I am thrilled with that. Like, we have to be able to get to that place.
Absolutely. Thank you for your insightful questions, Daniela. So our next question comes from Caroline. Caroline asks, how do we approach the folks who are quietly supporting abortion? Are they quietly holding us back?
Supporting abortion. I mean, are they quiet? That's a really good and important question. I think that we need to leave space for people who are not going to be like out and proud with their pro-choice beliefs because we don't know what's going on culturally, geographically. I think that like we all have a different ability to talk about our politics and beliefs in a way that is safe, right? I think that those of us who do have the ability to talk about it should, right? For me, I feel like I'm in a position where I have a moral responsibility to talk the way that I do about abortion. But I also recognize that not everyone has that ability. Um, I think it would be great if everyone could be a little bit louder. And I do think that there are conversations that we need to have for the people who are sort of like pro-choice but quietly pro-choice but loudly judgmental,
Mm,
right? Where they are saying, "Oh, I'm pro-choice, but I don't like how she did that. I don't like abortion as birth control, which is not a real thing," right? Like I think those are the people that we need to focus on most as being harmful. Um, because they are, because when you say things like that and when you push forward that idea, you are helping conservatives with this idea of good and bad abortions and good and bad patients. And so I am actually less concerned with people who are quietly pro-choice than I am with the people who are loudly judgmentally pro-choice.
yeah. I really appreciate that. And for anyone who Jessica's repeated notion of no government interference at all, if that's resonating with you, I really encourage you to look into abolition, right?
Mm,
Look into abolition as a framework. Because I think oftentimes, we've also touched upon like new realities, new ways of thinking and being scary. Jessica just said, ask yourself, why is this scary? Because as long as we're operating within the confines of our own personal identities or the ways that we think things should be done, honestly, y'all, conservatives are operating in that same understanding. This is how we think things should be done. And the reason I'm uplifting abolition is because not only is there, do abolitionists envision a world where there's no policing, there's no mass incarceration, but abolitionists also ask us to address the cop in our head. So someone is pro-choice but loudly judgmental. You are policing the way that another person is trying to live their life. How then can you turn around and say, well, you can't tell me what to do when you just told another what to do? So to your point about socialization, there's all these very subtle, prevalent, insidious ways, right, in which we are not only taught to police ourselves, but each other. So again, if this notion of no government interference is resonating with you, look into abolition because it's really built upon that premise. And I think it can help speak to the interconnectedness of all these issues and therefore solutions that have been a recurring theme of our conversation tonight. Um, I see there's last call for questions. So we are coming up to our last question and we have about 9 minutes remaining. So if you have a sneaking question, get it in. And yeah, if you don't want me to say your name, your first name, say anonymous, and we'll make sure to get you in. But for now, I want to ask our last question, which comes from Julia, who I want to give a shout out to. Julia is actually a new member of the New Voices team. So thank you, Julia, for coming through and for your question. Julia asks, where do you see philanthropy and private funding coming into place with helping shift the narrative? So many times on the other side of the aisle, they are pumping millions of dollars into their storytelling. How can we support community-based organizations and their fight to be heard over the noise? Keeping our base energized and supported is important to illuminate truth and accuracy about bodily autonomy.
I love this question. I think what is so important to me, and I think what conservatives have done well, is I think that donors need to trust the people that they're helping out. I think that there needs to be like a certain relationship of trust there. And I think that there needs to be a little bit of letting go of control of the message and trusting that the activists that you're supporting, the content creators you're supporting, the journalists that you're supporting, know what they're doing. I think one of the smartest things that conservatives did, honestly, was, as Julia said, pumped all of this money, right? Let's just take social media, for example, pumped all of this money into the social media space. They didn't tell these influencers, here's your script and you have to stick to this exactly. They trusted that those content creators knew their audience, knew how, yeah, they gave them general talking points, but they know how to frame that to their audience. They know how to have these relationships and conversations with their audience in a way that is going to resonate and not feel stiff or forced. And they were right. I think what we see happen a lot on our side, again, let's just stick with social media, is that it just doesn't feel authentic because we like, there's just this control there of wanting everyone to, there's a difference between like, yes, let's stay on message and like, let's control what that message looks like. Let's control the way that you're saying it, when you're saying it. Like there needs to be some trust with the people who have done such a good job of building relationships with their audiences, right? And so I think like letting go of a little bit of control is a great place to start. And as you said, earlier, like being bolder, like let's be bold, let's throw some shit at the wall and see what happens. We have a real opportunity here to do things differently, to do things bigger, to do like, so let's take it.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you lifting up that control, right? Because in a lot of my electoral organizing work last year, it's contradictory to have a message of freedom and operate like a robot. It doesn't make sense, and everyday people see through it and you don't excite them, right? Because you're simply a politician trying to get something from them, having nothing for them, right? So like thank you. Like you've listed up such key things like shame, control, all of that is interlinked. And so I really, again, appreciate you getting to the core, encouraging us to get to the core why, right? And encouraging us to step, if it's at least a toe, step a toe outside of what you think has to be so that you can experience what can be. So thank you all for the questions. They were rich, they're insightful. I hope that you gained something extremely valuable from this conversation, and that Jessica planted some seeds in our heads and hearts that we can carry with us. Jessica, I'll be closing out soon, but I wanted to allow you to give a final word as we close out.
I just wanted to say thank you for the amazing questions from everyone. This is such a great conversation. It was really invigorating. I think it's easy to feel exhausted by this work, and it is hard, and I don't say that to diminish how difficult it is.
Yeah.
But it's so important that we're having these conversations, and it's so important that we're thinking about what's possible, what's next, what's bigger, what's bolder. And so I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to have that discussion and to sort of like dream a little bit bigger with you all. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining this thoughtful, rich discussion. And thank you, Jessica, for generously sharing your insights and expertise. And again, congratulations. I'm going to kick it to Diane, but in closing, I want to invite people to reflect on one key takeaway from our conversation and consider how to apply it to your daily life. Please stay connected to Women's Way, stay connected to Jessica and her work, and keep the conversation going. Keep the pages turning, and keep dreaming and scheming, because better is possible. And with that, I'll kick it to Diane to close this out.
Beulah and Jessica, I don't have much more to say. I mean, what both of you are so deeply inspiring. Beulah, you should be a moderator like all the time. What incredible questions and insights. And Jessica, your brilliance, your wisdom, deeply inspired me to take more action, to learn more. And hopefully all of you who are here today, the message is, we will save us, right? We will save us. And there's so much work being done in every community. And so I encourage you to reach out to communities, reach out to us. If you don't know about groups doing this, read Jessica's book, which is amazing. So thank you, Beulah. Thank you, Jessica. It's really such an inspiring conversation that really created a lot more hope for me personally. So thank you all for coming, and let's keep this fight going. Good night.